Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Food, Wine, and Travel Show, where we go across country and travel the world with members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. Let's go. Welcome, everyone. You know, every second Tuesday, second Friday, and third Monday, we get to chat with members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. And on Tuesdays, we go to the members who are running the destinations and letting you know about them. So Amy Nesler is back on the show. She is a communications and stewardship manager of San Juan Islands Visitor Bureau. So we are going to the beautiful San Juan Islands in Washington State in the Puget Sound, and we're going to get a taste of the region. Obviously seafood, right? But did you know there's wineries, there's distilleries, there's cideries, there's cheese, there's farms, there's historic pears, there's an amazing event coming up this fall. Am I getting this right, Amy?
You are, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me back. Yeah, we're looking, coming up in September. Washington has declared it Eat Local First month.
Okay.
So that feeds right into our annual fall celebration known as Savor the San Juans, where we really focus on our food and farms culture.
That's exciting.
Which, not everyone thinks of that when you think about islands, like how that might work. Because most people know us that, it's beautiful here, and people love to hike here, bike here, watch wildlife here, which, I highly recommend. It's fantastic to do. And just really kind of also get into exploring, when you're out biking, like, check out the roadside farm stands or, visit some of our farms, or the vineyards, or which, again, not a vineyard you wouldn't think of on an island.
Right. Well, I think the San Juan Islands is just such an amazing area because you've also got this different climate, not because you're not on the mainland, you are on the islands, but this is a region that historically was an agricultural zone and is contained, it kept that going, maintained it, but we're talking about really more small family farms, right?
Correct. And you're not really going to find like the big fields of crops here. Like that's not feasible for us. And some of those microclimates, like we are sometimes referred to as the banana belt of the of the Pacific Northwest.
Do you grow bananas out there?
It's because we're in the rain shadow of the Olympic Mountains. So we have half the rainfall that Seattle does, which kind of creates a little bit of a different growing season, lets us grow, some different kinds of fruits. Like, again, we've got a lot of different apples with like the Orcas pear actually was discovered growing wild here. It's a varietal that only grows on Orcas Island.
Wow.
It was discovered in the 70s, and there are trees still producing today. And it's such a great pear. Especially like it's probably one of my favorite preserves from Girl Meets Dirt, which is a company on Orcas taking advantage of this heritage fruit, because so much of it now, all those orchard trees that historically like were those farms are have become fragmented, and but the trees are still there, still producing. Some are more than 100 years old, and a lot of that fruit was being left for the deer.
Wow. But now some of these are so old, and I know eventually like 120, maybe 150 years, they could say, I'm going to rest now. Historically, some of these trees can last like 1,000 years. We never know. Is there anybody out there going, hey, we want to preserve these and graft them to make new babies? Like a fresh stock?
That I'm not sure about. I do know we have an organization here in the islands called Quiot. It comes from a Coast Salish term meaning a clean place. And their title is they're the Center for Historical Ecology. So what they're going through is actually mapping kind of actually where there were ancient gardens back from the Coast Salish, and as well as like building a living collection of traditional food plants like the great camas, the Colombian lily, Indian carrot, I believe is the name. But they're also kind of tracing some of the genetic ancestries for what are kind of these mystery apples that are still around that like we don't really know, it's not your average, Granny Smith
Okay. Wow. Wow. So
Yeah.
these are kind of like a native yet heritage fruit and or plant, depending on what the species is.
Right. Because, yes, back before, and I mean, this was pre probably, about the time of the Civil War, and before they started building
Wow.
dams on the Columbia River, which provided opportunity to irrigate into like the Yakima Valley and other
Mm-hmm.
eastern Washington, which is now very much kind of an agricultural hub. The San Juans were the provider of apples and cherries and pears to the greater Seattle area. Our historical museum here on San Juan Island actually has a canned fruit. I believe it's cherries that were entered in the 1909 Alaska Yukon exposition. It's still there. Like it's
Wow.
uh, certainly not anything I would want to eat anymore based on the way
Mm-mm.
it looks, but then, but that's still around.
Wow. Wow. So talk about being on the far west, right? So you're
Mhm.
competing with the frontier, the last frontier. But at the same time, so this really changed. And right now I know we're changing our landscape back to its natural habitat in some areas, as the West is doing such California all the way up, Oregon, Washington State, really working with the indigenous peoples to bring back the original landscape, undam some of the dams, let the rivers flow where they want to, because the water, as is said so often, wants to go home. It is a living being. So
Yes.
this helps with the salmon, but it also goes, hey, what we're never thinking of is like it cut off this other farming part of it, by
Correct.
damming.
Correct. And I know there's some movement, like I think things are still very in the early stages, but
Mhm.
some of our larger parks and protected lands, like the San Juan Island National Historical Park, and as well as the BLM, who oversees our national monument, are working with some of the recognized tribes to kind of work out an agreement of like cultivation gardens on those lands, so, so where they can still go forage for camas or like say the Columbia lily and things like that,
Wow.
so they can restore their lifeways, and
Mm,
teach the next generation.
that's incredible because also they're going to have some of their crops that need to go back home to grow properly. I know that from doing an interview between a museum out in Nebraska and people that were connected with Oklahoma. And of course, when our native peoples were moved and said, you're
Yes,
going to go here. They brought their seeds with them to grow in the next place. And the lady we were interviewing, and she was saying in her tribe, this was their corn. And when they moved to Oklahoma, and we're talking about like historically, right? All
sure.
of a sudden the corn doesn't grow no matter what you did to it, right? And so Nebraska, I think it was in Kearney, Nebraska, yeah, they opened it up and they all connected and said, "All right, come grow it here and let's see." As they brought this ancient, I mean, these you're talking about heritage foods, brought
Hmm.
them back home, and the corn flourished, and it was all that jeweled, beautiful, corn of the past. And it was, I mean, for the tribes people, it was like this is like their ancestry touch. It was like an ancestral touch. You know what I mean?
For sure. For sure. And I think definitely there's been a lot more movement in that direction here. Because, like we say, like there never really were San Juan Islands without people. Like everyone kind of thinks of like, oh, well, this land was always been this way, like, that it needs to be restored back before people were here. Well, no, that doesn't exist. Like
Wow.
that's why like when people are like, oh, we've got these beautiful wildflower fields of like camas. Like, yeah, those were cultivated by the Coast Salish. That wasn't just like
Okay.
wild grown.
So these are like, yeah, it's so fascinating, how people forget it's kind of similar to, like Chief Joseph bread. He was the person who introduced the Appaloosa horse.
Hmm.
But for some reason they think, oh, the indigenous people were just like out there being wild, and but they were also doing these, farming techniques that knew about water for sure. That I think they were just master water people and still to this day are, understand how the flow works, how it feeds into the web of life, and they cultivated along those principles.
Yes, and I think like I say, along with some of that movement, like with the parks and the monument, is not just for the gardening, like the terrestrial land-based crops, but also talking about bringing back reef-net fishing, which, is a very traditional way to fish for salmon primarily. And
Yeah.
I don't know that I could describe that process very well because I've never witnessed it. But I know, like, again, that's giving them that space and that opportunity to bring that kind of cultural tradition back.
Mm. Yeah, exactly. That's cool. That's cool. So now it's so all of this is in the works. So the past and the present, the past and the present is holding hands here.
Yes.
Right, which is cool. And at the same time, you're maintaining this small farm part of life. So it's so important. I know that you've been on the show a lot of times talking about the importance of sustainability. And that's another part of being able to do sustainable tourism, right? Is have people come over, yes, sample this and that, but understand like if our waterways are clean and things like that, that means the food you're eating. So it kind of all ties together, right, in the travel sphere.
It really does. And, and especially, like I say, I think our farm culture here is so unique, partly because we're islands and, because land, as you might guess,
Mhm.
is in short supply. Even what's there can be expensive, especially in
Mhm.
this market. And so that's where like collaboration comes in, creativity comes in. Like, for example, our place here in Friday Harbor called Madrone, Cellars, and Cider. They produce both wines and ciders. Like their winery is on a property that shares space with an animal sanctuary, but like they have a vineyard and an orchard on a completely different property that is also like a called Saltwater Farm, which has lodging and they have their own garden and like they host weddings all the time. Like so that's very much kind of that sharing of like, oh hey, yeah, here you can have this piece of our property to share because it's like, yeah, they're not going to find the space to have their own necessarily winery. And they also, well, I want to say people will be able to visit Madrone Cellars Winery coming up during the San Juan Islands farm tour in September. That's really kind of the kickoff to all of Savor. The San Juans are the farm tours. Yeah, the Lopez Island farm tour is September 18th through the 20th. San Juan is September 25th through the 27th, sorry. And Orcas Island is October 2nd through the 4th.
Okay.
And like I say, and Madrone Cellars, very much sustainability is kind of one of their bywords. They have they call a bottle reuse program. So there is kind of they used to call it a tasting room. Now it's kind of their bar and kitchen here, actually within Friday Harbor. And every pour bottle they use, like once it's empty, that doesn't just get tossed in the blue bin. It goes back to
Mhm.
the winery to
Cool.
be hand washed, sanitized. They'll remove the label, and they reuse
Mhm.
it. Like
That's
it'll,
amazing.
yeah. They're since 2022, they've recycled 600 bottles that way.
Oh, it all saves, and it's just such a good, every little bit we can do, I believe makes a difference.
Hmm. Absolutely, and that's like I say, supporting our producers is
Hmm.
what's keeps them in business, keeps them keeps those kind of heritage traditions alive in some ways.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, do you remember back in the day when you bought like sodas and you could take the soda bottles to the store for a refund?
I think in some places that still happens, but it certainly isn't
There's a
here.
few places and you see it and you're like, wow, this exists. But, we had some good rules back in the day.
Yeah, no, and I mean, recycling certainly definitely in the U.S. needs an overhaul.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, we don't have to go
No, no, but
far
this
into
is a
that,
good
but
way of doing it. I mean, it's
yeah,
just do it, within whatever you have. What can you reuse? You
right,
know. Yeah, we're unpolishing ourselves because if we need to as the human species, you know what I mean? We got to this point where everything has to be flashy new, and that's not true.
correct. And that's I think really where like island life is adaptable that way. We really kind of start thinking of like how can we cut down on those plastics or you know uh,
Hmm.
or those, like say, those glass bottles. Like there's another shop also here in Friday Harbor. It's considered an apothecary, but she also has something of a refillery.
Oh, cool.
So it's like, oh, you bought shampoo or whatever, you can, take that bottle back and refill it.
That's nice. But you see, I think it's worth it. I
Yeah.
just do.
Yeah. And, and people always question like, oh, well, this is so expensive or so that. And it's like, well, yes, it might be, well, in a sticker shock kind of way. But if you're considering, what the true cost of something, all that produce being shipped from Mexico, like what is that carbon footprint costing us? And that's really kind of where I think that farm culture for us comes back, because it then connects to our restaurants. And I won't say every restaurant, uses completely all locally sourced. That's not true and not possible.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not feasible. Yeah.
But I think most restaurants here will source local when they can.
Mm-hmm.
And some, like Ursa Minor on Lopez, who I think has been James Beard nominated before, the chef, like their menu changes so frequently, partly because they're relying on, trying to keep it as local as they can and also foraging when they can. So then, it's like, okay, well, if they can't get something this week, then then they change the menu. It's like,
Yeah.
gotta make that adaptation pretty quickly.
Well, I think it keeps it fresh and exciting, and that's how to look at it is like, this is exciting. It's what are we going to have? What's the surprise in the basket, And I also think all of this is an open discussion point to build relationships between, the guest or the shopper, the diner, and the farmer and the restaurateur, the chef. All of these conversations create a community that actually cares and has a dialogue. So it's not just, hey, I'm ordering from a button. These days, everything is a push button to get exactly what you want, when you want, on this time. And if it's 2 minutes late, I want a refund. We've got into this mode, and and we need to dial back so that we have these understandings to understand what did the winemaker go through with the grapes. Oh, this year it's this way, but it's simply Mother Nature, and what the grape grower could do and the winemaker could do with what they were given. It's that hand that we were given. How do we play that hand? And I think it's a relationship between the customer and the purveyor, always.
Well, and that really comes back to, talking about that kind of relationship. I mean, granted, I know we're 6 years removed here a little bit, but COVID still, has its ripple effect, because that actually because when all the restaurants had to shut down and we couldn't have, you couldn't dine in. Yes, you could do takeout, but they weren't doing this, they weren't ordering from the farms like they used to, so
right.
The farmers are suddenly like, oh God, what do I do?
I'm hanging out in solitary confinement in my vegetable patch. Let me bring you something.
Right. And that's the San Juan Islands food hub was born from that. So now even, it's not just restaurants, but like myself or, my friends and like as consumers, I mean, yes, it's still a push button. You can order it online, but it's like you see what's available this week, like from certain purveyors, like, like I can get goat cheese from Lopez or Orcas without actually having to physically go over there.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's also like you can do the same at the farmer's market, but like maybe some weeks again they can't. If the ferry has an issue, maybe they can't make it to the farmer's market. But so it's just kind of that opportunity to be creative. I can look at and go, do I want to make? It's like, oh well, like Lum Farm has lamb this week, and like and beets and all these like, so it's really an opportunity to where like, oh, I could make. XYZ, whatever.
And that's for the chefs too in the restaurants. Like, what do we make? And then knowing like, hey, this person over here that's my buddy makes a cider and it'll pair well with this, So again, more dialogue, more community growth. And even for visitors, you feel welcome when you go somewhere and like, if you're in a restaurant and they can say, oh no, we're pairing this with this winemaker's Syrah from over here. That's such a cool thing. You feel like this is a community and you tend to relax more and enjoy the destination when you have that community vibe.
Yeah, and even in some cases, if visitors are interested, we have farm stays. If you want to get your hands dirty and learn kind of what it takes to run a
Sure.
small farm or do things. Yeah, there's a fairly new farm here on San Juan called Saturn's Return, and yeah, they only have, I think, 4 or 5 bedrooms where people can stay. And if you want to, you can help them. I mean, you can feed the chickens, you can help them gather eggs, you can weed the vegetable garden,
Get out there.
you know, plant in the orchard, like, you know,
That's cool.
whatever, however the spirit moves you, like they don't require it if you stay there.
Hmm.
And it's, and it's more of like, if you want to help, you can. And then they have their farm store with, the honey that comes from their bees and then, the
Oh.
eggs from their chickens. I mean, because a lot of their eggs get used within their kitchen, like, because they make breakfast every day. But if there's anything left,
Hmm.
you can purchase it from the farm store.
That's cool.
Uh,
That's really nice that people have that. And so, do a lot of people come from Seattle pretty much and Portland to you or British Columbia over? Who comes out the most, do you think? And do you get people
um,
internationally?
we do get people internationally. I would say typically in a year, more than 60% of our visitors are from within Washington.
Okay.
Um, and again, a high percentage of that is from like the Western region,
Hmm.
Seattle, Tacoma, Bellingham, the Olympic area to an extent, followed by Portland and California. So a lot of West Coast. We have seen some Canadian drop off a little bit in the
Sure.
last couple of years, but we still, like, people from BC still come out here, and knowing it's like,
Border communities tend to still do whatever they want to do.
yes,
They do. They do. Because there's
yeah.
families, there's relationships, there's business
Mhm.
collaborations. So much happen over our borders that, I know there's politics and all that involved, but pretty much we all still want to do what we want to do. And we'll work around it as best we can.
Yeah. No, like I said, I think most of, compared to some other Washington destinations like Bellingham, we haven't seen the same dent in Canadian visitation.
That's great. That's great. Now, do you get people from Alaska who's like, hey, I'm coming for those pears? Our family remembers them.
I think, well, as I say, I know we get people from Alaska.
Mhm.
I don't know that that's why they're coming.
Yeah, I know. Just I had to mess with you on that. Yeah, but I think a lot of people, the nature, like you're saying, and so it's the three islands, right? Primarily Lopez, San Juan, and Friday.
And San Juan Island, which is where
Yeah.
Friday Harbor is based. Those are the
Okay,
three
Friday
largest.
Harbor. That's it. Yeah.
Those are the three largest islands where they get the most visitation.
Hmm.
Certainly, I mean, because we have 172 within the archipelago that at least have names, but some of them are the size of your
Wow.
kitchen table. So,
Yeah, right. And you could kayak to them and touch them and say hello and keep
yes,
going.
but many of them are also marine state parks. So they're
Nice.
not necessarily inhabited, you know, full time out of the year, but like you can kayak or boat there, like especially north of Orcas, the popular ones are Mesha and Sucia to kayak out to, because Sucia especially has some really cool geologic formations.
Okay.
And that's
Oh,
actually where they discovered like a dinosaur fossil that's now like the state dinosaur. It's called like Suciasaurus or something.
that's right. That's right. That's so cool. I remember that happening. Now, one thing we didn't touch on, so we know wineries, farm to table, agriculture, pears, all of that good stuff. So we know all that, but now we touched a little bit on salmon, but the seafood has got to be a big part of your diet in the San Juan Islands, right?
Sure. And we do have shellfish farms out here, and
Okay.
that's a very sustainable way actually to clean water because they're filter feeders.
Nice.
Yeah, Westcott Bay here on San Juan provides a lot of oysters. I think they do also go grow clams and mussels to an extent, but oysters are their primary. Me personally, not a fan of raw oysters, but they do barbecued ones and like kind of grilled. So good. I highly
Wow.
recommend.
I've never heard of barbecued oysters, but hey, why not?
Yeah, no, there's I forget, they call it like the stoplight trio. They have a sampler. There's three of them. One has barbecue, and there's a couple other different sauces. Yeah, it kind of goes red, yellow, and green.
All right. Yeah.
But I
Cool.
recommend it. It's definitely, especially if you're not a huge fan of raw oysters. That's a way of doing it with, to where they're, like I say, they're grilled but they're not like highly breaded.
Okay. Huh.
And yeah, and again, like cultivating shellfish goes back to,
Mm.
the Coast Salish. Like there's still evidence of what they call clam gardens, and like an English camp, which is part of the National Historical Park. You can still see shell middens along the shoreline, which midden is a very fancy archaeological term for a trash pile.
Okay, so and that's from the indigenous people, just like here it is. So it's like the mounds that they have in the southeast. Some of the mounds, I'm talking to you from Arkansas today, but drove past an archaeological site that we went to. It's part of their state parks. It's Toltec something. Anyway, mounds. I forgot the mounds, but the mounds were garbage piles. So you're
Yep.
walking over and people are like, no, they're not. They're all burial sites. I'm like, yes, there were some, but this is actually where they did their own landfill things, and it's cool I mean, they had to do something with it, but it wasn't like our kind of trash. They didn't have TVs in there.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, same thing actually out on Sucia. You can see some shell middens.
Wow.
So it's really, I mean, because you're looking into like this, I don't want to call it a cliff, but it's above I'm looking up at it.
Yes.
In
Yes, they've
in
done
the
that.
side of
They
the
did that in
hillside.
South Carolina. I went to a mound that was all shell, and then some use it obviously for like some of the shells of oysters were used for buildings, but then there was this mound that was all, and I didn't quite get it, just like you're talking about. I kept looking like where, and it was like, no, what you're looking at is actually it. And I
Yeah.
just thought it was a cliff. And you just said, because I'm going, like, I don't get it. Like it's
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. But once and the first instinct is like, oh, well, maybe the tide brought those in. And it's like, no, nope, nope.
Wow, that's
Pile.
amazing because that's a civilization there, right?
Mhm. Yeah,
Wow.
for sure.
Wow. That's so different, and that's the thing about traveling our country and exploring to be able to cross, just that connection even between the Southeast to, the Pacific Northwest of similar habits,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
different. That's so awesome.
Yeah. A, a method that, yeah, as you say, crosses
Hmm.
geographical locations, and it just has its own particular adaptation
I
to the place
know. I
you
just
are.
didn't yeah. Oh, wow. That's amazing. So Savor the San Juans. What are the dates again? And people can go to your website, right, for that information, everyone. It's visit sanjuans.com. So this is coming up in September. So perfectly paired for the Eat Local month of Washington State.
Yes. Yeah. So like I say, the farm tours are what kick it off. Starting September 18th is the beginning of the Lopez farm tour through the 20th. September 25th through 27th is San Juan.
Hmm.
And Orcas is October 2nd through the 4th. And yeah, like some of these, like say, San Juan Saturn's Return will be part of that farm tour, as will Madrone. Cellars. Saturn's Return, I believe, is hosting a farm dinner out in their orchard. And like some of the farms taking place on Lopez include Barnell Bakery, which has a lot of heritage grain to their bread. Like, I mean, some of the things that we become known for, like say, like Barnell's bread or the Mama Bird greens here on San Juan. It's Mama Bird Farms. You can get it through the food hub or sometimes even at the grocery store. But it's bagged greens. You don't have to worry about that stupid parasite. But like they sell out fast. Like the second they come in, everyone's like, it's like, oh, it's Mama Bird greens are here. Yay. It's like Barnell bread. Like get that out of, yeah, get it fast. And actually, Island Fibers will also be doing some demonstrations on Lopez, which is very much, granted, it's not food, but it is like another, agricultural product in that
Hmm.
bowl of, carding, weaving, and even according to the description, lichen dyeing. So using natural dyes like lichen.
Oh, cool.
So yeah,
Huh.
definitely, like I say, there's all those kinds of demonstrations. So it's not just, touring the farm. They'll do, and not all the details have been released yet. But yeah, there's usually some place you can get to press your own cider, which again, I recommend. It's the world's freshest cider. It's so much fun to do.
Cool.
Although it is an upper body workout.
Yes, that's a good
And
thing.
and there's usually there will also be, I don't have the dates yet but there's usually some farm dinners and like wine dinners as part of Savor. Restaurant week is actually kind of the bookend. We start with the farm tours in September, and then restaurant week here in San Juan ends up in November. And I don't know that they've released those dates yet.
Okay, so everyone keep going to visit sanjuans.com.
/Savor.
Okay, the link is in the episode notes.
Yes.
So keep watching and you have a newsletter that people can sign up for and follow on social media and everything, so people can keep up with the dates as they get released.
Yeah, and we'll be releasing any and all of the details as we get them. And like I say, and all of those events will be either on our calendar and our social channels, which Instagram and Facebook are both Visit San Juans, and I believe that's also TikTok. Although I'm of a generation that doesn't do TikTok, so I don't know.
Well, gee, check your demographics.
Well, I'm also not in charge of the social media, so.
Well, it'll be out on social media and in your newsletter and your website. So visit sanjuans.com/savor. And what a great way for everyone to get an introduction and also enjoy the fall harvest,
Yeah, and it's an opportunity to really kind of, as we say, peek behind that barn door. You get to meet your makers.
Well, you're also talking about how all these farms have had to diversify and connect in different ways, and that's part of it. And diversity is the important factor to a good landscape, right? It has to have that diversity of plants and all that good stuff. So the other part of it is shopping. And I think this is a great way to get your holiday shopping started off as well when you're going around. Get that bottle of wine, get preserves and bread or whatever. You can put it in the freezer, things like that. So your holiday season's actually enjoyable.
Yes, no, and I will say, because when I go visit my family for Christmas, I always bring Girl Meets Dirt preserves, especially for the Orcas Pear, because we do a cheese plate on Christmas Eve. Because that's the thing about the preserves. They actually sometimes, some of them go better with cheeses than they do like on toast.
Okay.
Which is not something I had ever really thought about until I was here. But my niece and nephew have threatened that they won't let me in the state if I don't have that jar of preserves with me for Christmas.
Okay. So but that's the thing, because you're not going to get it everywhere else. And there's going to be some kind of taste that is just, local. That's awesome. So yeah, holiday shopping, this is the way to go.
Yeah. And especially, like I say, our farmers markets, the name is slightly misleading because it's not just our farmers. It is also our artists who will have booths there. So it's definitely a fun way to get a jump on that shopping.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's good to have you back on the show, Amy. We look forward to more, and we'll be following up on your website and that TikTok. I hope you have a Savor San Juan Islands dance.
I'm sure we probably will.
Well, everyone also keep up with the International Food Wine Travel Writers Association. September is also a big month. For everyone, they'll be getting ready for their big conference that comes up in October. And so stay tuned to them at IFWTWA.org. So good to have you, Amy.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio's Food, Wine, and Travel Show, featuring members of the International Food, Wine, Travel Writers Association. We encourage you to visit their website. We say IFWTWA, which is IFWTWA.org. You can also follow us at bigblendradio.com. Happy travels, everyone!